Well, welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, episode 3. My name is Clayton. I am your host, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us. If at the end of this, it's something that is helpful for you, I hope that you'll consider subscribing and really using your voice to get this out there to other people who might enjoy this and might be able to glean something from it. On the podcast, we try to explore what matters, and we all spend a ton of time exploring things that absolutely don't matter, scrolling through endless feeds and binging through endless shows. And so if we could just block off a few hours of our month to really focus on topics that, if we were to understand these ideas and truths and actually apply them to our life, we would grow that much closer to our potential. I like to remind us that I'm starting with a core assumption that your life matters probably more than you could imagine. And because your life matters, we should spend some of our time exploring these truths and ideas and topics that matter. Today, we are looking at the stories we tell, and this is another one of those truths that if we can really learn it, dive as deep as I know how anyway to understand it, and then come back to the surface with some application. Your life, your relationships, your career, your parenting, the struggles you have with your ex-spouse, the friends that you've lost along this crazy road of life, all of those things will not only have a framework of understanding, but you will have some real tools in your tool belt to begin making sense of them and to begin making changes in your life that have real substance to them. The stories that we tell works on quite a few layers, but it starts with understanding exactly how we get from the things we experience in life to the action that we take. And most of us have an understanding that life works something like this. We have an experience. So we see or hear something, right? That's kind of like the baseline of experience, that we've experienced something with our sight, with one of our five senses. We've heard it, we've realized it, and we've come into contact with something, and then we take action, right? And so the stove is hot, we touch it with our hand. Because it's hot, we pull our hand away. We've had an experience, and then we've taken action. And this is basically describing instinct. This is really something that is common across all of the higher range animals, and certainly among adults. And maybe you have a little bit more of a nuanced view of this, because there is something that separates us from the rest of creation. And you can see some evidence of this in certain animals that have higher brain function. But it really isn't even comparable to how we're able to do it as humans. And so maybe you understand that there is a step in between what we see and what we hear and the action that we take because of it. And so maybe you understand that you see and hear something, and then you have a feeling or you have some emotions about what you've seen and heard, and then you take action. And so there is this step in between, and that is a higher range of experience and consciousness than the majority of nature and the animal kingdom has. So we see and hear, we have an experience, then we have our feelings and emotions, and based on those feelings and emotions, we take action. And so that can explain the difference between a friend saying something to you like, "Oh man, when are you ever going to get a job?" And you laughing and, dapping them up and like, "I know, right? Like, it's been a minute. I need to get a job." And it's fun, right? And they have this equity and they say it to it. And it's the exact same experience. We have to understand this. When your parent says, "So when are you going to get a job?" And your action is completely different. Same experience, but completely different action. And you're like, "You never believe in me. And man, you're always hating on me. And when could I ever live up to your expectations?" Same experience, right? When are you going to get a job? The difference is what you feel about it in between. And so maybe you have that level of understanding that we have what we see and hear, we have what we experience, and then we have how we feel about it and our emotions. And then that leads us to action. However, there is actually another step. And there is at least some evidence of animals who feel something akin to emotion, and that maybe even that emotion can alter their decisions. And maybe you've experienced this, or at least you've convinced yourself that you've experienced it with your dog, or in my opinion, much less likely your cat. And I have a dog and a cat, and my dog definitely has some sense of feeling, and my cat is just evil and maniacal. And like if you have a goldfish, I'm sorry, but your goldfish doesn't have any emotions. It just doesn't have the level of brain functionality, and it doesn't have the neurological network to be able to really process an emotion. We know that we do. We are incredibly emotional beings as humans. And so we think, we see and hear, then we feel, we have our emotion, and then we take action. But there's another step. And not understanding this step will leave you shackled to the whims of your emotions. And emotions are powerful tools that have been given to us, and they are necessary. And when they are used properly, they are good. Emotion is how we experience the fullness of the world. The positive emotions like joy and the right sense of pride in terms of being proud of yourself or being proud of others. The idea of love as an emotion, which love is actually like an amalgamation of all of these different positive emotions that come into play. Even our negative emotions, we saw last week, have a very real value in our life. And if nothing else, we can appreciate the positive emotions because we experience the negative emotions. And how would we even know that happiness and joy and euphoria and feelings of success are positive if we didn't have anything to contrast them to? C.S. Lewis said something like, the only reason that we know a crooked stick is crooked is because we've seen one that is straight. And so the contrast of our negative emotions helps push us to our positives. And as we'll see a little bit in today's episode, our negative emotions also act as indicators to us of changes that often need to take place in order for us to move closer to our potential. Our emotions often are like all of the different warning indicators that show up on our dashboards of our car. And if you aren't aware that you have low tire pressure, then you could really be in danger of a blowout. And blowouts can flip cars and kill people, right? And so even the negative emotions, if we're using them properly and we have a framework for understanding them, can help push us forward and grow us to be more and more successful in life. And so at a very elementary understanding, we have an experience and then we take action. And then we grow up and we realize that we have an experience, we see and hear, and then we have a feeling or an emotion, and then we take action. But today I am suggesting that we raise our awareness to a new level. And what actually happens in life, in this path between experience and action, is we have an experience, we see and we hear something, and then here's the critical step that most of us are missing. After we see or hear, after we experience, the next step is we tell ourselves a story. And then we feel, that's our emotion, and then we take action. So again, we see and we hear, and then before we have emotion, we tell ourselves a story. And this happens at such an alarming rate. I mean, it happens in a fraction of a second. And these stories that we tell, they have been built up inside of us since the day that we entered planet Earth. Now, if you're wondering where a lot of this content is coming from, I'm pulling specifically from two different books, and I'm pulling from probably dozens of books for the fullness of this content. But what we're really honed in on today comes out of, number one, a book called Crucial Conversations. And this is by a group called Vital Smarts. And the second book is called Crash the Chatterbox, and it's by Pastor Stephen Furtick. Both of those books will be in the description of today's podcast. I highly, highly suggest that you look into both of these books because there is a pathway, and there are two very distinct steps between what we experience and the action that we take. There are the stories that we tell, and the stories that we tell determine our emotional response. And together, the stories that we tell, combined with our emotions, make up what's called our inner narrative. And the inner narrative is, depending on how you look at it, perhaps the most single powerful neurological truth in your life. In other words, it is the thing in your mind that is practically the most powerful as an indicator of the life that you're going to live. Another way to say this is that the story in our mind controls the destiny of our lives. And if you let that sink in, it will become incredibly obvious just how serious this is. The story in our mind, the inner narrative that is a combination of the stories that we tell and the emotions that they produce, the story in our mind controls the destiny of our life because we see and we experience, but we're not just animals. We don't just see and experience and then have nothing but instinct to lead us to our action. We have these neurological steps in between. And the stories we tell and the emotions that garners combine to produce the actions that we take in life. And one of the ways to think about your life is it is the sum total of all of the actions that you have ever taken and all of the actions that you will ever take. And if our inner narrative drives our actions, then our actions actually bow to our inner narrative, which means our inner narrative is what controls our destiny, even more so than our actions. And that is a baffling thought. It is a thought that if we took really seriously, we would spend some very serious time understanding this. We would not hesitate to grab these books and dive into them and grab other books on the topic and understand the stories that we tell. We gave an example of a friend who gives you a hard time about not finding a job yet. And they say the exact same words. Hey, when are you ever going to find a job? Well, you have a different emotional response, which leads you to different actions. But why do you have a different emotional response than when your parent says it? You have a different response because of the story that you're telling. And so a story that you might tell about your friend is they don't have a job either. And we love talking trash to each other. It's one of the ways that we actually connect. They have my best interest at heart. They're possibly even giving me a hard time to motivate me to fill out more applications and go to more interviews so that I can get a job. They're for me. They love me with this brotherly or sisterly love. And because of that story that you're telling, the emotion that you have is a positive experience of a collection of emotions that lead you to the action of talking trash back to them in a way that actually builds equity between you and grows your relationship. However, in this scenario, when a parent says, hey, when are you going to get a job? You have a specific story that you are telling yourself about what your parent has just said. And maybe that story is something like, they always wanted me to go to college, and I know that they're so disappointed that I never went. And they think because I didn't go to college, that that's the reason that I haven't been picked up for any of these jobs. And even when I was young, when I would do chores around the house, I could never do them good enough for my parents to actually be proud of me. And because I can never live up to their expectation, this is just one more way that I'm failing them. And you're thinking about your sibling who does have a great job. And you're like, they've always compared me. And if they didn't have a job either, they wouldn't be so hard on me. So there's this giant collection of stories. And all of those stories are built so deeply inside of us. And they happen in this such incredible timing, like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second. And then they color the emotion, they determine the emotion, and then our actions follow our emotions. And so the story in our mind, the story that we tell, controls the destiny of our lives. And that's really, really significant. And what this is implying is a couple things that are pretty big statements. And maybe they're things that if you spend time to think about them, you inherently know, but they're very difficult to come to terms with or maybe even admit. These are big implications of the pathway between experience and action. The first is that people, events, and things don't make you mad. Things outside of you don't make you mad. You make you mad. More specifically, the stories that you tell sandwiched in between what you experience and the action you take determine the emotions that you have. And so in one sense, it is the people, places, and things in your past that have created the stories in your mind that do influence the emotion that you have. However, I am going to suggest in today's episode that you can take control of the stories that you tell. And if you're able to master your stories and you abdicate that responsibility and you just allow the stories to go unattended to, then that means it is you by abdication, by giving up the responsibility of taking control of your stories. It is you that is making you mad. It is you that is making you angry. And that's a really hard truth to hear. And yet it is freedom. And I remember when this was laid out to me. And once you see it, once we put it up and it's like, okay, I have an experience, I see or hear something, and then I tell a story and then I feel and then I act, it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of obvious. And yet it's not intuitive. And if we're able to ignore that truth then we can just live as the victim of our own emotions, and we can say things like, that's just how I am. I'm just an angry person. You're not an angry person. You're telling angry stories. Well, I'm just really hard on people. No, chances are someone was incredibly hard on you. And now that you have some sense of control or status, you're being hard on other people because the stories that you tell influence emotions that say being hard on people is the right way to live life. This is such a powerful and empowering truth if we can really understand it. And we have some help because there was an incredible movie that came out. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. But Pixar, who, by the way, is just simply incredible. I have right behind me on the bookshelf, Creativity Inc. And we're going to do a podcast on creative confidence and cautious creativity and really understanding. And their process has helped me a lot, and even how to think about creativity. But Pixar has just done some mind-blowing work. And this for sure will not be the first time I reference a Pixar movie. But they came out with a movie called Inside Out a few years ago. And what this movie did is it introduced you to these personified characters who are controlling the stories in your mind. And what it is each emotion gets personified. And so there is a little red guy named Anger, and there is this, super happy, I think it's Amy Poehler or someone is the voice actress. And, she is joy, and there's sadness, and there is disgust. And what you see throughout the movie is you see the characters going through these certain moments in life, and then it flashes inside of their mind and sees the wrestle and the tension between the emotions to format the stories. And then those stories determine the emotion that the character acts with. And, it's a pretty neurologically accurate display, as much as you could expect from a movie that's targeted at children. And in one of these scenes, the main character, who's a young girl, she just moved to a new town, and everything's different. I think it's kind of like the Pixar equivalent of San Francisco or somewhere in California. And they were up in Minnesota. And so she was on a hockey team, and she has all these wonderful memories of the snow and her team that she was on and playing hockey. And moving is really, really challenging, especially if it's not something that you're in the rhythm of doing. And so what we see in this scene is we see her observation. So we see what she is seeing and hearing. That's her experiences. And then we are seeing this gap in between what she experiences and the action that she takes. And so I think this can be insightful to help us understand really what we're talking about today. So she's in her new classroom.
Okay, we got a group of cool girls at 2 o'clock.
How do you know?
Double ears pierced, infinity scarf.
Whoa, is she wearing eyeshadow?
Yeah, we want to be friends with them.
Let's go talk to them.
All right, so immediately we see a story that's being told, which is those are the cool girls. And it's so classic. And this is really a great look inside the mind of an upper elementary or maybe middle schooler. It's hard to tell with cartoon characters sometimes, but it's like, how do we know they're the cool girls? Well, they have double ear piercings, and like, oh my gosh, one of them has eyeshadow on. And so we're telling ourselves a story, and the story is about an experience that we've had in life, and our experiences in life have informed us that what makes someone cool are these very superficial, obvious aesthetic pieces of a person that the world has told us is cool. And so now we've got to try to make friends. And now we're going to see fear come into play.
Are you kidding? We're not talking to them. We want them to like us.
Oh, yeah. Wait, what?
Almost finished with the potential disasters. Worst scenario is either quicksand, spontaneous combustion, or getting called on by the teacher.
These are such common stories. I mean, when you walk into a new school, and I moved a lot, and we'll talk about that later, but when you move into a new classroom, all you want to do is just like blend into the paint in the wall. You don't want anyone to see you. You want to take your time to get comfortable. And so, it's like, what could be the worst thing that happens here? And the story that fear is telling us is, what if the teacher calls on us? That would be the ultimate disaster.
As long as none of those happen.
Okay, everybody, we have a new student in class today.
Are you kidding me? Out of the gates? This is not happening.
Riley, would you like to tell us something about yourself?
No! Pretend we can't speak English.
Don't worry, I got this.
And so what we see is the competition of the stories that have accrued throughout this little girl's lifetime, the way that it's influencing the emotions in her mind, and all of these emotions competing to be at the wheel of our life.
Okay. My name is Riley Anderson. I'm from Minnesota, and now I live here.
And how about Minnesota? Can you tell us something about it? Well, you certainly get a lot more snow than we do.
She's hilarious.
Yeah, it gets pretty cold. The lake freezes over, and that's when we play hockey. I'm on a great team. We're called the Prairie Dogs. My friend Meg plays forward, and my dad's the coach. Pretty much everyone in my family skates. It's kind of a family tradition. We go out on the lake almost every weekend.
And so we notice there's an actual story being told in her mind right now, and she is remembering specific events from her past. And the action that we see in this little girl is joy and, nostalgia and these great memories. However, something's about to change pretty drastically.
Or we did till I moved away.
Hey, what
Wait,
gives?
what?
Hey, Sadness, you touched a memory? We talked about this.
Sadness, you touched a memory. We talked about this. And what happens from here on out is one of the critical moments of the show, which is in the process of retelling this beautiful story of her past and these great memories and smiling through the whole thing, she realizes that those stories aren't a part of her realities. She's saying things in present tense, we're on a team and we all go and play hockey and we love this together. But the realization dawns on her that that is a story now from her past. It doesn't have anything to do with her present. And so this is the difference. It's the same story, but now it is being viewed in a different light, which is leading her to a different emotion and is going to lead her to a different action. And if you've seen the story, you know that she ends up on her very first day of school breaking down in tears, which is about as bad as a first day can go in front of your new classmates. The story in our mind controls the destiny of our lives, and that's a big statement, but your destiny is made up of the sum total of all of the actions that you're going to take. And so it's so critical to begin to understand how to master our stories. We see this at play all the time, and you can literally think of any scenario in your life, and you can look back at any action that you've taken today or yesterday or within the last week, and you can think about it through this lens of, I understand what action I took, and I probably understand what emotional state that I was in. But the real question is, what story are you telling? In every situation, we have to fill in the blank. We are going to assume and that is either going to be, we're going to assume the worst, or we're going to assume the best. And we are pretty much experts at assuming the best about ourselves and assuming the worst about everyone who is around us. And there's actually a name for this. This is called the fundamental attribution error. And it's called fundamental because it is something that without intervention is shared by all people in all places. It's a fundamental part of how we process the world. And it's like biologically dialed into us because it's a way that we protect ourselves. And the fundamental attribution error looks something like this. There are 4 quadrants, and 2 of the categories are myself and someone else. And the other 2 categories are positive and negative. And so if you're listening to this on audio only, it's like if you drew a square and made 4 quadrants. And so there's one place where myself and positive meet. And that is when you have done something positive. And when I do something positive, that's just a part of who I am. We blame that on our personality. We assume the best. I'm doing something positive because, I'm just kind of a good person, and I guess it comes naturally to me. I usually think about other people first. And I'm not perfect, but who really is? And so we have this ability to really see ourselves in a good light. When I do something positive, it's who I am. It's my personality. Now, when someone else does something positive, it's just a coincidence. It's just you did something positive because the circumstances were correct. Now, there's also negative. And so when I do something negative, the tables turn. When I do something negative, it's because of circumstances. It was necessary. I wish it could have been different. But you saw the way that they were treating me, or you saw the traffic that I was sitting in, or I mean, you know what I've been through in my past. And so when I do something negative, it's always about the circumstances around me. However, when someone else does something negative, it's their personality. That's just who they are. And so again, when I do something positive, it's who I am. When I do something negative, I'm a victim of circumstance. When you do something positive, it's just because of the circumstances. You kind of got lucky. When you do something negative, that's who you are. That is your personality. And so, I mean, we can easily think of some very, very easy to understand examples. It's like when I am speeding on the highway, that's just circumstance, I'm late and I'm late to my kid's game and I'm really just being a good parent, and so it's actually kind of a positive thing because I care so much about my kids that I'm going to get there on time. And so when I'm cutting people off and flipping people off and going 20 miles over the speed limit and almost causing wrecks, I'm not a bad person. That's not who I am. It's just the circumstances. But when you are speeding, oh man, that's because you are a jerk. You see the difference? You are a jerk. That's your personality. That's who you are. I'm speeding. It's just the circumstances around me. I can assume the best about myself, but I'm going to assume the worst about you. The same can be true for positive aspects. It's like, when I really add something to a meeting in my business, it's because I'm a contributor. It's part of who I am. That's my personality. I mean, I'm all for it. I'm a team player, but when someone else adds something positive or has a really good idea, they just got lucky. I bet they heard that from somewhere else, or, maybe they just happen to have a little bit of experience in there, but it can't be about who they are. And so we're experts at this. This is the fundamental attribution error. I attribute to you malice in all circumstances. And when you do something positive, it was a mistake. And when you do something negative, it was who you are. And when I do something negative, it was a mistake. And when I do something positive, that's who I am. I attribute to you the worst assumption possible. To even begin to master our stories, we have to understand that this is how we're hardwired. And because we are hardwired to self-protect in this way, we have an uphill battle. And so you're going to have to decide, first of all, if the uphill battle is worth it. And that's probably going to rely on a couple of things. Number one, it's going to rely on whether or not you really believe that if you don't take control of your stories will take control of you. And so do you want to be responsible for your destiny and your actions and your success? Or do you want to leave it up to chance? Do you want to leave it up to all of the ways that you have learned to tell the stories you tell through all of the experiences, both positive and negative in your life? And maybe you're successful sometimes and maybe you're not. It's just kind of 50-50. It's a flip of the coin. Maybe things will go well, maybe they won't. Do you want to leave your relationships up to the stories that exist in your head, or do you want to take responsibility for actually maintaining and improving the relationships you have? Because we all have some seriously broken stories, and we all have some very real hurt and very real trauma in our past. And all of that hurt and all of that trauma is informing the stories in our minds. And let me remind you, the story in your mind is determining the emotions that lead to your actions. And so if you're married, you have some stories that you filter your spouse's actions through. And if you forgot to do the chore that you kind of take care of, well, it was an accident. Of course it was. And as a matter of fact, not only was it an accident, but you actually had really good reason for doing it. It's like, I didn't do the dishes, but I didn't do the dishes because I really saw that our dog was looking extra lonely that day. And so instead, I was there for him. And once I was there, it was like, the dog probably wants to watch SportsCenter. I know he likes it when we watch SportsCenter. So just an hour and a half of that. And then you were home and I was going to do the dishes. I'm going to do them later anyway. But now you're here and you're all on my case because you're always on my case. And it's okay. So for me, it was an accident. But when you don't make the bed, it's because you don't care. You just don't care about this house. You don't care about this family. You don't care how I feel. You see how that happens? It's like, this is your personality. And we're going to attribute to you the worst possible assumption. And this is what turns like little bitty fights and little misses here and there into divorces. Because assuming the worst isn't a one-time occurrence. It's like the snowflake that hits the top of the hill and starts a small snowball effect that grows and grows and grows, and eventually is large enough to cause the avalanche that buries you both and separates you forever. The stories that we tell are at the heart of all of the places that we end up in life that we don't understand how we got there. I don't understand how we got to this point where we are now in a divorce court fighting over assets or children. Well, I can guarantee you that somewhere along the way, it started with the stories in your mind. And there's always exceptions to the rule. And it's like, maybe you had all the right stories in your mind and they had affairs or abused you or whatever else. And so like, just understand there's always exceptions to the rules, but the general rule, because most divorces are irreconcilable differences, and irreconcilable differences start with reconcilable differences with the wrong stories attached to them. And so we assume the worst. And here's what assuming the best, and that's going to be very difficult to do because we've lived pretty much our entire life becoming experts at assuming the worst. Striving towards assuming the best is a tacit acknowledgement that you actually cannot know someone's intentions. And that is such a powerful, powerful truth that you can know patterns, and humans are like pattern recognition machines. And you can know someone's backstory and you can know their history, but you cannot actually know their intentions. And so we either assume the best and allow people their best shot possible of making their own way in our relationships or businesses or friendships, or we assume the worst about them and we doom them to failure before it's even began. And this is everything. What do we assume about our children? Parenting is hard, man. We'll do some episodes on parenting because parenting is like hard. It is so difficult, and it's only getting more difficult in our increasingly technological world. Parenting is hard, and it is made exponentially harder by not mastering the stories that are creating the emotions that are leading to our actions as parents. Striving to assume the best is acknowledging I actually can't know the intentions that I'm telling a story about. And so if you love someone, maybe you could even say you owe it to them to tell the best story possible until you have an unbelievably solid reason to no longer do that. And as a parent, if you want to not just raise kids who like don't go to jail and survive, but you want to raise kids who love you and actually want to come back and hang out with you when you're raising adult children and end up with character and values that you desperately want for them, then it's like parenting is hard enough. And maybe your kids deserve for you to assume the best about their intentions until they give you a real reason not to. And it's amazing what happens when you begin to believe the best about people, because it is so odd. And it goes so opposite of this thing that is fundamental to us of attributing the wrong assumptions to people, that the appreciation people have allows them to thrive. And not always. And that's the beautiful thing, is if someone is really going to screw up and you're a manager and you have people on your team and all these other things people have said and all of these other things that you have thought and all these other experiences you've had with people of similar personality profiles, and that's gonna be the stories that you tell. And so they're just screwed, you know? It's like they have no chance in hell. But instead, you're going to master your stories and assume the best about that person. There's a good chance they're going to end up thriving. And if they don't, it won't be because you made them fail before they ever even tried. The strive towards assuming the best will transform your relationships. It will transform your leadership. It will transform your parenting. It will transform your marriage. It will give you language for understanding when you get things wrong. Language like, what story am I telling? What do I actually believe about this? And so either you master your stories or your stories master you. Either you control your stories or your stories control your actions, and your life is just the accumulation of all of the actions that you take over time. There is a way for us to master our stories, but it is difficult. I mean, it really genuinely takes some effort because, again, these stories are happening in a fraction of a second. And so what are some just practical ways to begin to get in control of your story so that you get in control of your emotions, so that you actually maintain some control over the actions that you take and end up with some responsibility for the way that you're living? Well, the first thing that we have to do is we have to significantly slow down our responses, and we don't want to do this. We're busy, right? We talk about that every week. I'm so busy, and it's this badge of honor that, I barely have time to eat or sleep or do anything, and first of all, that's just BS, man. It's like you're spending hours doing something that doesn't matter. Across your week, at a minimum, you're spending a few hours doing something, whether it's the accumulation of the times that you're, scrolling through social media accounts or the videos you're watching on YouTube. And I realize you might be watching this video on YouTube, and so maybe I'm part of the problem, but it's like you have time, right? And you certainly have time to slow down your responses to the experiences that are catalyzing the stories you're telling that are leading to your emotions and your actions. There are just some brilliant proverbs in scripture about how it is the fool who speaks as quickly as they possibly can. And one of the proverbs says something like, where talking abounds, sin is always present. So it's like, if you are not a fool, just talk long enough and you will prove to people that you are, And so we have to slow down. And this takes a lot of intention, and it does take a lot of practice, and you're probably not going to get it right away. But when there is a missed expectation, and that's your experiences, you thought your kid was going to do something, or you thought your spouse was going to do something, or you thought your employee was going to do something, or you thought your friend was going to do something, it's like, just slow down, because what we want to do is we want to just shoot from the hip and respond right away. And if we are responding quickly, we are probably not in control of the story. Now, once you've practiced this and actually built the resilience of mastering your stories, over time, you can respond quicker and quicker. But the humility to stop in conflict with someone and say, I need some time to process this. Number one, you're going to build your influence with that person right away, because what you're actually telling them is, I want to give myself a chance to assume the best about you and the situation. I need to slow down. If I don't slow down, I will not control this story or my response. My stories will control me. And so we have to slow down. And our ability to slow down can be actually a mechanism that we put into place by rethinking our emotions. And so many of us see our emotions as the lens through which to make our actions. And I want to suggest that that's kind of a terrible way to live. And by living that way, where we see our emotions as the catalyst for what our next step should be, or the next word that we say, or the next action that we take, or the next decision that we go through with, we're really removing everything that separates us from the animal world. Instead of instinct, we're just relying on emotion, and our emotions betray us because our emotions don't come out of nowhere. Our emotions come from the stories that we tell, and most of our stories are broken. And so instead, if we saw emotions like yield signs, then instead of being the lens to make decisions through, they would become a mechanism that requires us to slow down. And so the difference is, if your emotion is the lens to make your actions with, then your emotions actually encourage you to speed up. And I'm saying that your emotions, both positive and negative, should be yield signs that cause you to slow down. And if you can make that change and that change alone, you will live a more successful life. Emotions are like yield signs, and what they do is they help us merge the stories we're telling with reasonable actions. And so if you remember what this looks like, we see and hear, that's our experience, and then we tell a story, and then we feel, and then we act. And so between our story and our action is our emotions. And either we're just going to blow through them like a green light to act however our emotions are telling us instead. If our feelings act as a yield sign, then what they will do is they will begin to integrate our stories with our actions, it allows us to slow down. And slowing down, if your emotions become yield signs, not green light, right? Yield signs, then you can take step 2. And step 2 is to question your stories. Once you've slowed down enough, you can see your stories for what they are, and you can begin to ask some very, very specific and very important questions. One question to ask is, why would a reasonable, rational person do that? And so when there is a missed expectation, or when someone says something to you and the story that you tell about it immediately brings up an emotion of suspicion or anger or betrayal or denial, all of these very negative things, then that's a yield sign. You slow down and you ask a question like, why would a reasonable, rational person do that? And part of what that does is it speaks into existence that the person that you're communicating with is actually a reasonable, rational person. And if you don't believe that, then you are automatically starting off assuming the worst. And so this is like a trigger to assume the best. This person is reasonable. This person is rational. That's why I married them, or that's why I'm friends with them. Or, this is hard because your 3-year-old, almost by definition, is not reasonable or rational. However, if you treat them as such, then it might actually give them a standard to grow into. So why would a reasonable, rational person do that? What we often do is a fallacy called straw manning. And this is a debate technique where you say back to someone, or the story that you tell about someone isn't what they actually believe or intend, but it is a version of it that they wouldn't agree with either. And it's very easy to tear down because it's not actually real. It doesn't actually exist. And so instead, to be a great debater, instead of straw manning someone, you steel man them, which means I'm going to try my hardest to understand where they are coming from before I make any assumptions about that. If you can think, why would a reasonable, rational person do that? Then you can ask a question like, if I were them, if I were that person, what assumption would I be hoping for? If I come in and I expected that the bed was going to be made, and it's not made, what assumption would I hope that my spouse had if I were in a similar situation? If you expected a coworker, a peer, to have completed a part of a project that you're working on together, it would be very easy to instantly, in a fraction of a second, go back to all the other times that people have let you down. And when you were in middle school and you had a project and you did all your work, but your friend didn't do all of their work, and you were never friends again because they took your grade from an A to a C. And so now you're going to transpose that moment onto your coworker. And so it's like, what assumption would you want if you were them? And if you were your coworker, you would probably want the assumption of, I almost always get my work done, and I do care about this project, and I want both of us to succeed. And if I haven't done my part, it means that something serious has happened. And if you're able to put yourself in that person's shoes in that way and think what assumption you would want, then instead of going in and exploding on them with rage about taking that line of action about what in the world is going on, you might open with something like, hey, is everything okay? I noticed you hadn't gotten your part done. And you might be shocked when they say, actually, I'm going through this, or I experienced that. Or you'll watch as their eyes widen and their brow begins to perspire, and it dawns on them that they forgot to do a part of the project. And you can see in them the very real sadness that they've left you down. And now you're at a different place. And instead of just bleeding out your influence with that person, you're going to build it just because you asked a better question. You questioned your stories. You slowed down. Your emotion was a yield sign to lead you to try and merge the story that you're telling with the actions that you're going to take. A great question to ask is it possible I'm wrong? And I'll tell you the answer. The answer is, drumroll please, yes, it is possible that you are wrong. And yet, we are so convinced of our own standing in a conversation that we will almost never consider the fact that we could be the one in the wrong. And let's take that exact same scenario, because you might walk in and it's like they haven't done any of their part. And so you're just going to explode all over them, and you're going to ruin a relationship, and you're going to lose all of your influence. And then it turns out that you had the date wrong, and you thought it was due on Wednesday, but it's due Wednesday of next month. And so you just saved yourself looking like a complete fool because you ask yourself, is it possible that I am wrong? We're questioning our stories. A great question to ask is, what do I really want? What do I really want out of this situation? What do I really want out of my relationship with my wife? Do I really want a made bed? Or do I really want to live in a home that is full of love and understanding? What's my ultimate goal? Is my ultimate goal for both my wife and I to both progress towards our potential in life and live a long, full life and stay not only married and not only liking each other, but loving each other throughout all of the decades and decades of marital bliss? Like, if that's my goal and that's what I really want, I'm instantly going to be very, very careful about how I approach this. What do I really want leads you to actually ask the question, is this even worth addressing? Or if I can assume the best about this, then maybe instead of using this as a punitive measure against the person I love the most in the world, I can take 3 minutes of my day, make the dang bed, find out what happened later, and serve them in this situation. What do I really want? What do you really want in your relationship with your coworkers, with your peers, with the people that you supervise? What do you really want out of your relationship with your kids? Is your ultimate goal their obedience? That's a good question. I think we should strive for obedient children, but is that the ultimate goal? Because the ultimate goal is more along the lines of a child who chooses a relationship with me when they don't have to and lives a life pursuing their purpose. Then that is a different story. And you'll begin to tell different stories, and your different stories will lead you to different emotions, and your different emotions will lead you to different actions. And your life is a sum total of all of the actions that you take. And so what do? How do we master our stories? Number one, we have to slow down. And here's the mechanism. Your emotions are not green lights towards your actions. Your emotions are giant yield signs telling you to slow down, question your stories, and tell a better story that integrates with actions that you take that lead you towards your destiny. This is how you begin controlling your stories. And if you can control your story, you can actually gain some control in your life. And what would it mean for you to actually take control in your life? I mean, what difference would that make? Because for most of us, most of the time, we feel fully and completely out of control. And like the movie Inside Out, we have all of these little characters fighting over what story to tell. And what story we tell decides which of those emotions we put at the wheel. And whatever emotion we put at the wheel, they are going to drive our life in that direction. They're going to determine the actions that we take. Now, here's the hard part. The hard part is you're going to get this wrong, and you're going to get it wrong a lot. Like a lot. But there's almost a cheat code. And just as a general rule, I never believe in cheat codes, you know? I mean, except on like NBA Jam, which is the one video game that I know how to play on Nintendo 64. And I'm pretty good. And I know how to have unending stamina. And so I can run fast the whole time, and I can jump really high. And I would be the Bulls, and Michael Jordan is a cheat code. And so I believe in that cheat code. And I believe in this one. Here's the cheat code to mastering your stories. Apologize with purpose. When you get this wrong, you're going to have one of two categories of reactions. There's infinite reactions you could have, but there's largely two categories, which is, well, I'll try again next time. You know, I screwed that up. I'm not really sure what happened there. Or you're going to apologize with purpose. And apologizing with purpose is taking the time to walk through the steps you should have taken initially on the backside. And so you have to slow down. You didn't slow down in the moment, which is why you actually now owe an apology. So now you have to slow down on the other side. And you have to go back and you have to investigate your emotions, because your emotion drove your action. And once you understand your emotion, you now understand your yield sign. And you have to dig a layer deeper, which is, what was the story that I was telling that led to my emotion? And you might be really, really surprised by the stories that you're telling, depending on how honest you're willing to be with yourself. And our stories can come from way back. And our stories that are at the wheel of the actions of our lives, they can come from moments, places, and people that seem very, very small in the grand scale of life, and yet have left giant impacts on you as a person. And so you begin to understand the story that you told, and you have to then interrogate that story. Question your story. Ask now in retrospect, why would a reasonable, rational person do whatever they did to lead to this disagreement? Maybe ask, if I were that person, what assumption would I have hoped for? Try to steel man them instead of straw man them. Ask a very hard question, which is it possible that I'm wrong? And the answer is almost always yes. And I had a great leader one time, Andre Jennings, shout out. And he told me there's always something to apologize for. And he's right. And a sincere apology, an apology with purpose, it grows almost more influence than getting it right the first time, which doesn't mean get it wrong on purpose so that you can apologize. And that's not the cheat code. That's a way for people to figure that out. And then, all your influence is gone. But there's always something to apologize for. Is it possible that I'm wrong? And by really exploring that question, then it's going to inform what your apology actually entails. And what do I really want? Such a solid question. What do I really want? In this moment, in this situation, with this person, with this relationship, in this future, and in the destiny I'm headed to, what do I really want? Because to get to what I really want, I'm going to have to take the right actions. And to take the right actions, I'm going to have the right emotions. And to have the right emotions don't happen to me. I make emotions by the stories I tell. And so I have to master my stories. I can't always control what I see and experience. In fact, I can hardly ever control it. But I can master my stories. And then apologize with purpose. And one of the things that separates successful people from people who struggle is the ability to genuinely apologize. And this is what a genuine apology looks like. It looks like walking back through with great intention what took place, and then addressing with that person in detail what it is exactly that you got wrong. And when you can demonstrate to that person that you have a high level of understanding of what you caused, and then a whole nother layer deeper, if you can help them understand the stories you were telling, which takes a lot of humility to admit. If you can help them understand that, then not only do they come to terms with the fact that you really understood what you did, but you help them understand why. Apologizing with purpose happens regardless of whether or not they accept your apology. If you're apologizing for the acceptance of that apology, then it's not sincere. Your apology is not about them. It is about you doing what you can do to make right with the wrong that you've caused. Apologize with purpose. I've seen the power of this in my own life. A few years ago, I became the leader of a new team that eventually became MetaChurch. And we came in and we clarified a piece of our mission. And we decided with that clarity that there were changes that needed to happen. And they happened really rapidly. And, something that happens with me is I'm not risk avoidant, and I have a high change tolerance. And I have to, because my dad was in the military and I moved 18 times before I was out of high school. 18 times. And so, your personality is part nature and part nurture, and it's hard to determine exactly how much of which piece. And when I was really little, I was actually pretty risk avoidant, and I was very shy, and I was very reserved, and I didn't like change. But when you move 18 times in 18 years, it's like change or die. And so I was nurtured into being very acceptive to risk and to change. And so when it becomes clear that change is necessary to help fulfill a mission or to help move towards the destiny that we all desire, I can do it really quickly, and often, admittedly, too quickly. And so that's what I did. I just moved into action. And one of the stories that I struggle with in leadership is everyone's personality works like mine. That's a story that I've held on to for a really long time, and that I have to fight all of the time. And so everyone's personality is like mine, and everybody processes things like I process them. And so I like change, and I make change really quick. And so surely everyone else does too. I had another story that I was telling, which is everyone understands that when I compliment the changes that are taking place, what I'm really doing is complimenting them, because these changes wouldn't be possible without the buy-in from this team of leaders and them actually executing these changes at a super high level. And so what was happening was I was communicating these changes really consistently. And here's what I didn't realize. I didn't realize that by communicating the changes, I was implicitly contrasting the way things were before I got there. And so the feeling that I was instilling within the culture is, we've made changes to be better, which means how y'all were was worse. And that wasn't actually a part of my narrative, because it wasn't that we were changing from bad to good. And it wasn't even that we were really changing from good to better. We had clarified a part of our mission. And so we were changing from already good to a different kind of good that points us more in the direction of the new clarity we have about our mission. All that is happening in my mind and is not actually being spoken out to anybody else. And so what's being received is, man, this thing really sucked until about 3 days ago when I got here. And so, man, what kind of pride would it take to actually believe that? And thank God one of our team members was courageous enough to come to me and to say, I think you should know how what you're saying is affecting the people on this team. And so in that moment of confrontation, I have to make a decision. And if the story that I'm telling is this guy doesn't know what he's talking about because everyone processes everything how I process it. And, probably all these people moved 18 times before they were 18 years old. And so everybody loves change. And, it's obvious that we're not moving from bad to better or from good to better. It's like, this is just different. We're making changes. They're different, and different doesn't mean bad. It just means different. And we're really focused on a mission and we're headed in that direction. And so, what are these people even talking about? And why are we wasting our time on this? Because a part of my personality is like, let's just get stuff done, and so I'm a driver, I'm a high driver, and I'm a thinker. And so I don't make decisions with my emotions. I generally make decisions with my thoughts. And there's all these pieces. And so this larger umbrella of a narrative that everyone should think like I think and feel like I feel had put me in a situation where I was damaging the people that I care about and that I desperately need in order for this movement to actually move. And so the stories in our mind control the destiny of our lives. And if I wouldn't have been willing to take that seriously, I would have continued to do damage. I would have continued to lose influence. I would have continued to lose the buy-in of the people who are essential to this mission actually being accomplished. And I've gotten this wrong so many times that it's like I racked my brain for a situation where I got it right, because it was like immediately obvious to me that he was right. But it wasn't immediately obvious to me exactly why he was right. And so I had to slow down. And by slowing down the response, I was able to question the stories I was telling. And because I had learned this technique quite a ways back, I knew some of my consistent narratives that are just wrong. And it was like, here you are again, dude. Here you are again, assuming that everyone thinks the way you think and feels the way you feel. And that's such bad leadership. And so I tried to dig a layer deeper. And it's like, if I were them, what assumption would I hope for? And what are all the ways that I'm wrong? And what do I really want out of getting the incredible honor of being a leader of this team? And only then, once I walked through that process of trying to integrate a better story with my actions, was I able to apologize with real purpose and outline a true understanding of what I'd caused. And thinking through specific examples in a group setting and pointing at team members and telling them how the narrative that I had been using and speaking out loud had reflected on them, and then letting them understand the story I was telling, which helped them understand my intention. And these are the ways that you begin to correct an attribution error that is fundamental across human beings. This takes real work. In the Bible, which some of you may believe in and some of you may not, but regardless of what you think about it, it is the document at the foundation of Western culture, and even the document itself and the story that it tells, and dozens and dozens of authors across thousands of years, all telling one cohesive narrative. Like the documents themselves are pretty miraculous. And in one of the very first stories after the creation narrative it's the story of the fall of man. And so the first man and the first woman, they disobey the only rule that God has for them. And once they have disobeyed, their eyes are open. They have the full knowledge of both good and evil. And so now they understand intention. And when you live in innocence, you live unaware of intention. Or if you're aware of it, it's like all intentions are good. But now their eyes are open and they have the fundamental ability to assume the worst. And so they go and they hide. And they hide from the God of Scripture, who can see everything, hear everything, and knows everything all the time. And so that's not the guy to hide from. It's like if you're going to play hide and seek with anyone, God's going to win, right? It's very interesting how God handles this, because even though he sees everything and knows everything, he knows exactly where they are, he hears everything, nothing is hidden from him, nothing's out of his sight, he asks questions. And he asks, where are you? And that's a really good question. And it's a good question for your inner narrative, the combination of the stories you're telling and the emotions that those are producing. And it's like, where are you in your mind? Where are you with these stories that you're telling? Are you just living, being drifted along by the stories that have accrued in your mind that happen at a fraction of a second without you ever speaking into them at all? And they're driving the actions of your life pretty much without any responsibility or control from you. And of course, he finds them and he asks them why they're hiding, you know? And that's a pretty good question to think about as well, because our inner narratives are a part of how we hide from the truth of the situation. And it's like, what do we really want? Because Adam and Eve had a perfect union with God. And so what they should want more than anything is not to hide from God, but to be found from God. But they now have an inner narrative that says that when God finds them, he's going to kill them. And so they hide. And we hide behind false narratives. And here's something that's hard is, it's like before we confront the stories we tell about each other, we must first confront the stories we tell about ourselves. And the stories we tell about others are destined to be wrong. They are destined to be wrong. They almost have no choice but to be wrong until we master the stories that we're telling about us. And so our false narratives are not just present in our relationship with other people, places, things, and processes. Our false narratives are present in how we think about ourselves. And so where are you and why are you hiding? And then I think he asks the most important question. God says, because Adam says, well, we were naked. We were naked. That's why we hid. We were naked. And God says, who told you that? Who told you that? And I think that's where I want to end, is the narratives that are controlling your life and are leading you to places and spaces and places in your mind, the way that you're viewing the world, the level of fear that you're living with, the level of anxiety that you have about your future, the brokenness of your relationships that continue to crack and fracture and get further and further apart from one another, the way that you think about political opponents, maybe the way that you view the idea of God. Who told you that? Like, really? And that's a powerful question. Who told you that you were naked? Who told you that you were worthless? Who told you that you weren't good enough? Who told you that you would never be loved? Who told you that the way that you look, that's being measured by some arbitrary standard of the world, is not beautiful? Who told you that? Because until you wrestle that question down to the ground, you're going to have narratives that exist in your mind that control your emotions, that control your actions. And so slow down. Instead of your emotions just green lighting actions that will lead you to places you don't want to be, make your emotions yield signs. You need to merge. And if you can merge the stories you tell with the actions that you take, then you can point your life in the direction that it was meant to go. Master the stories that you tell, and you'll begin to live the life you want to live. I want to thank you for joining me on episode 3 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. I want to remind you to subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to this channel. If you're listening to this on an audio platform, make sure you subscribe to the audio version and share this, man. Use your voice and we are talking about such critical things to live the best life you can. I want to remind you about the books, Crucial Conversations, and Crash the Chatterbox. All I'm sharing in this podcast are books people put in my hands and wisdom from people who put arms around my shoulders. I love you guys. I hope to see you next